That's right. You're listening to and watching the Arsenal Review USA podcast, live show, whatever you want to call it. It's Arsenal Review USA. You can find us at arsenalreviewusa.com. We're in cahoots with Arsenal America and thebigdiag.com. Those are our affiliates, those are our buddies. Um, as an Arsenal supporter, you need a lot of buddies nowadays just to keep you happy, just to keep you from killing yourself after a
Mm.
good opportunity to finish in the top four, went begging for Arsenal. But that's kind of like water under the bridge at this point. Arsenal finished well enough, I guess, beating Burnley 3-1 with Aubameyang snatching, was it a three-way tie for the Golden Boot? So a lot of, I think, well, not a lot of, but a few positives. A nice little, very, very, very thin sheen added to the end of the season there with the win over Burnley. But a lot of talking points after the EPL season has finally completely come to a close. Where does Arsenal go from here? Were there any, truly memorable moments from this season that you can really hold on to and cherish amidst some of the more, some of the more memorable bad moments that I think occurred at the end of the season that kind of get stuck in the craw. So we'll pick over those things here in this podcast, myself and Kyle, which is a good opportunity to say this is not a podcast only. This is also a live show for those of you who are staring square at us. But I don't know what the best place to start is, other than to go over the Burnley game in a little bit of a 1,000-foot view. It was a game that Arsenal could have found themselves behind in, as most of the games, this season you could probably say about Arsenal and their defense. But very, very fortunate to get that first goal for Aubameyang, who took it well enough. And then the second goal was a brilliant. I don't want to say it was Marco van Basten-esque, but it wasn't that difficult. But it was a difficult volley to take. He took it sublimely. Then some, usual Arsenal jitters allowed Burnley to get back into it 2-1 before Willock put things away. Technically put things away. I don't know if that was technically his goal. For some reason, I don't know why I'm switching to you, Kyle, but
I
for
do
some reason,
I do think it was
what?
awarded to him. Yes.
It was awarded to him. I know that, but
Yeah.
anyway, good
Is
enough for him.
in Kedia, not Willock.
Yeah, right. Um, so yes, it's one of those endings that you're glad that it ends well for Arsenal. You're glad that finally they get a win after so many terrible performances, so many losses. But man, it's still a season of what could have been, as they finish so close to the top four, having dropped so many games. I guess we discussed the most, or the brunt of this, this opportunity got wasted in the last podcast. So maybe it's time to look back, even further back than the Burnley game, and then look forward to what Arsenal can hopefully look forward to this
Mm.
summer. That's the big question, though. Can they look forward to anything substantial? I'm sure you can look forward to a few things other than it just being summer. I don't know if there's a lot of signings that Arsenal can look forward to this summer. But Kyle, it sounds like you've been at least perusing the free agent wherever those free agents hang out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, do we want to do that first, or do we want to
Sure.
go over the results? Yeah, so I mean, just out of curiosity, I think we talked about it on the last podcast that I would like to see Arsenal find some motivated role players rather than the Ozils of the world. He's still a very polarizing figure. Obviously, there are some Arsenal fans out there, many of which probably listen to this podcast, that are huge Ozil supporters and think that he is vital to the team's success. Especially after this season, I would 100% disagree with that.
But what did he end up with assist-wise? Not to derail you, but I mean, that's a
think he
good.
had 2.
I think he had more than that, but it was relatively.
No, I thought that was from a Premier League. I think it
Premier
was
League, yeah,
2.
yeah.
Yeah, I
It was
think
like 4 overall or something.
Yeah, four overall, 2. And it was some like really obscure defender had more assists. I saw the stat. I forget who it was.
Well, I know. Sorry, I'm like jumping all over your train of thought here.
No
I
worries.
know. Bellerin had more, and he only played what, like a third of this quarter. So,
Yeah,
anyway.
probably a third, but yeah. So the comments and the discussion was around using our ability and I guess maybe our cheapness to look for $15 to $20 million signings, and then also some of those players that are also out of contract. So maybe not so much a Ramsey, but I think you can find some Welbecks of the world who are a good role player, provide a little bit something different, can play multiple positions, and probably would have been good for a couple of goals and a few more points perhaps late on in the season had he been available. But I found this list on goal.com. It's got some very recognizable faces. I'm just going to read off a few. I'm not suggesting necessarily that Arsenal sign these individuals. I'm just telling you that these individuals are out of contract this summer with their current clubs. So first and foremost, starting off the list, Mario Balotelli is out of contract this summer. So if we want a striker that gets paid a lot of money but doesn't do much, Ben Affa, who we just saw from Rennes in the Europa League. Gary Cahill, defender for Chelsea, is out of contract this summer. He's only 32, so maybe another year or two out of him.
He's younger than a lot of our other defenders. So
that is true. Andy Carroll, out of contract. He tends to score a lot against Arsenal, so who knows?
He'll do well in training sessions, but terrible in the games.
Yeah. Matteo Darmian from Manchester United, out of contract this summer. Let's see. Olivier Giroud, out of contract this summer. It looks like he's going to be going back to Ligue 1, however. So we'll see what happens. Diego Godin, however you pronounce it.
Godin.
Yeah. From Atletico, he is out of contract, but then again, he's 32 as well. Actually, 33, I think, is what the ever reliable Wikipedia says. So, maybe another year or two playing in the top flight. Vincent Kompany.
Ooh, he's old, though.
Yeah, he is old, and he is always injured.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Juan Mata, James Milner, Nacho Monreal, maybe a guy we could re-sign, perhaps.
Yeah.
Moreno from Liverpool, Samir Nasri at West Ham, out of contract. Frank Ribéry, perhaps. Arjen Robben, only 35. Good value there.
So do you have any real diamonds in the rough that you're going to lay on us? Because I'm getting a theme that it's kind of underwhelming. These are players that used to be great, or
I think the point is that there are there's probably 12 to 15 total on this list. Some names more recognizable than others, of course. Right. And say 5-6 seasons ago, this would have been an absolute all-star, group of all-stars that would demand big money and of course big transfers and would not be out of contract. I guess the point being that they would not, the teams that they were with would have not let their contracts run down like many of other contracts have, obviously. So while this list in particular is not necessarily going to get Arsenal where we want to be, I think there could be others out there that are not readily available on the internet that, hopefully the squad and those that are making these transfer decisions could go after. And, again, not necessarily out of contract, but those budding stars that have come good for us in the past, under Wenger. And I'm not suggesting that we move back to a Wenger-like approach in signing a 19 or 20-year-old and waiting 2 or 3 years before they can contribute to the side. But, I think with the exception of Lacazette and Aubameyang, who are both big money signings, we haven't really hit it big, with a lot of our big money signings or most of our big money signings in the last couple years. And I know Ozil's been with the club now for 5 seasons?
Yeah, it was 12 or 13. It was 13.
It was 13, 14. Yeah. So I guess it will be 6 seasons. His 6th season will start here come the fall, which is a really long time, a lot longer than you would kind of think that he's been around. I remember his very first assist was that game against Sunderland to Olivier Giroud, took it out of the air, kind of two-touched it into the box, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, he's going to be unbelievable. And in his defense, of course, he was very good his first couple seasons. But when your stars don't pay off, like some of them haven't, you have to, I think, go another direction. And like we talked about, I don't want to revamp and rehash everything we talked about last week, but the point is that I think we found good values in players in the past, and some kind of just out of sheer like panic buys.
Yeah.
When we lost 8-2 to Man City, or excuse me, United in 2011, like Arteta was kind of a panic buy, but I think he turned out to be a great player, and I think we paid 12 to 15 million for him, and we got 4 or 5 really good years from him, maybe longer, I guess. So those sorts of players, I think there's some, especially, I think there's some good experience around the Premier League that potentially we could bring in. I think that might be the way to go from a defensive and midfield standpoint. I think a striker, top-notch strikers like Aubameyang and Lacazette can adapt a little bit quicker. We've seen them adapt a little quicker than the other players or the other positions. And I think maybe if we bring anyone in for the positions that we really need it, like a defender or defenders rather, maybe looking at the Premier League for some of these guys that are out of contract or playing second fiddle to a new manager, perhaps at some of the bigger clubs. I think there's good value to be had. And, so we'll see what happens. But, and I think, generally speaking, most of us, as we've mentioned, we wouldn't be so maybe nervous or looking forward to what Arsenal are going to do this summer had we not just gone through the run of form that we had. Because, up until, I guess, the middle of April, when we lost to Crystal Palace at home, everything was going pretty well. I think people were generally pleased with how Arsenal's season was going. Hey, finishing third in the Premier League and Unai Emery's first season, your Europa League final, that's a pretty good kickoff to, the new reign under a new manager. And then it all went, to a hell in a handbasket, as we know. And, I think the results that we saw throughout the season, as that I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second, most of that was overshadowed for, I think, most Arsenal fans with the essentially the last month of play, and I think that's really unfortunate because there were some really good moments, and I thought Arsenal played some fantastic football for stretches during the year. And as we alluded to with Dan last week when we chatted with him, this run of form in particular came at pretty much the worst time, especially when your top 4 rivals like Tottenham and Chelsea even were really, really struggling, and Arsenal couldn't capitalize on it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I mean that something we've definitely already discussed, in no small measure that, Arsenal did drop the ball when the ball was very hard to drop, and it was very important that they didn't drop it. So, obviously we all know what we're talking about here. The last stretch of the season, the last, what was it, 6, 7 games, maybe more than that. So, the question is, why did that happen, and how can Arsenal stop that from happening next season? Because even just stopping that from happening, getting a handful of points in the same situation next season could net Arsenal, a third or even a second place finish. So I think that's very attainable for Arsenal. The question is whether or not Unai Emery is capable of taking them there, is capable of rebuilding this squad. So I think the first thing that we kind of, we talked about some free agents there and some players that Arsenal could bring in. The first thing on top of everybody's mind is beefing up, bolstering that defense. And we talked about this a little bit last week. Is Unai Emery and Sanye and everyone else at Arsenal capable of doing that, of actually recruiting, the number of players they need to, and then the quality of players they need to bolster that defense and supply a base to the rest of the team. And that's where it gets really scary for, I think, most Arsenal fans, is that we don't have technically the Sven Mislintat person there at the club now who can do that, who's specializing in doing that. So where is that where's all that work going to be done? Who's going to be the person doing all that work? Someone we kind of doesn't have that much of a track record with us anyway. So, a little bit of a scary summer coming up. But sometimes, like we said, those can turn into good things, whether they manifest themselves in like the bargain basement um, transfer windows, which are always fun. Sometimes not fruitful, but always fun. But before we get too much into the future of things, I think we do need to look back on the season that, like you said, yeah, I mean, lest we forget, had some really good points, had some really promising points, showed Arsenal were capable of good things, and Unai Emery was capable of good things, and then they, cocked it all up at the end. So I don't know if I want to get into like a report card per se of each player or even like certain sections because we all know what the strong suits and the weak points were for Arsenal this season. But just going through kind of, I think we've done it before. Different categories of the season, like your moment of the season. I know these might be a little subjective and sometimes fairly generic, but some of them I think get to the point of what went well for Arsenal and what went poorly for Arsenal. So, I mean, first of all, what would you say, Kyle, would be your moment of the season? I guess it could be good or it could be bad, but whatever it is, it's pretty epic. All right, it's the one that sticks out to you the most, and I'm unfortunately, I got to say well, lest we forget, there's still one more big game to be played this season, so that could trump all this stuff. But um, I've got mine in my head. Do you have yours? Do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a couple, but I don't want to
Or just
be.
go with one. Let's say.
Well, yeah, but I don't want it to be the same as yours.
Oh well, it's probably not going to be the
Okay.
same as mine. So just spit it out, I guess, if you want to, or if you
Yeah.
got it on
So
mic.
I think particularly in the first half of the season, the highlight would have to be the 4-2 against Tottenham.
Mm, yes.
Uh, we have, whether we like it or not, or care to admit it or not, we've struggled against them in recent years, especially away from home. And I know that result could have definitely gone Arsenal's way as well there in February. However, I think the 4-2 was the most complete that Arsenal played all season. I think both of the goals that I think every podcast on earth discussed this fact that Dyer was offsides and Harry Kane was also offsides and then dove like he does. Mustafi pushed him in the back, but
Mm,
regardless, the way that Arsenal came back from that to win late, to go on score 3 goals in the second half, after going into halftime down 2-1, showed a lot of character. The sort of result and fight back that you would have maybe expected a little more from Arsenal in other matches, but you definitely got in this big game. And I thought for the most part, this performance against Tottenham or that performance was pretty indicative and comparatively speaking, what you kind of got from, with maybe the exception of Liverpool away, obviously, and then both matches against City, we saw Arsenal show up in most of the big matches this season,
yeah.
which is kind of a flip to what we had seen in the past, of course. So it was that was very satisfying to see us be so dominant against Tottenham, where, obviously we've beaten them over the last couple seasons and we've gone back and forth a lot more than we're typically used to. But this was the first time, I think, since maybe the 5-2s that we saw 5, 6, 7 seasons ago, that you felt like when you walked away from the match that we were completely dominant and we showed it in the game.
Yeah. Now mine would be maybe this is a duller match, but the Man U win at Old Trafford. Just Arsenal continuing their unbeaten run at that point, which was a pretty good unbeaten run. I mean, I think, like you said, that was a further for me. That what stuck was a further exhibition of their dominance and how they could kind of like they could lock down games and kind of control games even though their defense wasn't the best. So that was promising, and I think that's what made the end of the seasons like so just shocking. Is that Arsenal were capable at one point of going on a run there, and unfortunately something snapped. Whether that was Aaron Ramsey, who I think actually got injured in that Man U game. Um,
So,
his his departure that really, thwarted Arsenal or foiled Arsenal's impetus going forward in their link up play in midfield to the offense. I don't know, but that was a further illustration of their dominance. And, it was just nice to win at Old
Yeah.
Trafford, which Arsenal doesn't do that much. So that was my moment of the season.
Well, and I hate
Yeah.
to take your moment of the season away, but we tied 2-2 in that match. That was right after we beat.
Oh, right. No, I'm thinking.
So
Exactly.
you're saying
You did ruin it.
You're saying the Emirates. It was at the Emirates, right?
Yes.
In March.
Right. I guess we didn't lose it. I'm getting confused with the fact we didn't lose at Old Trafford, which is kind of a milestone for us too, sadly. Yes. So yes, I guess it would be at the Emirates. Well, we played them. We played them fairly close together, do we not? United.
Yes, we played United.
Right.
We drew them 2-2 the Wednesday after we beat Tottenham. So it was 3 days later.
That was a hectic run. Yeah, that's what's so crazy about Arsenal this season. As I mix up all my memories, that was what's so crazy about them is that they played pretty well against the big teams, with the exception of getting spanked by Liverpool. They played pretty well against the big teams and played terribly against everyone below them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what that means for Unai Emery and his setup, but if he could just research the teams under the top 6 as well as he researches the teams in the top 6, that would bode well for the future. Okay, so since I screwed up that one completely, I'll start with wanker of the season. My wanker of the season, it can be someone who antagonizes Arsenal directly. I think that's how we've done it in the past. But when it comes to antagonizing Arsenal directly, I'm sorry, but I can't think of any outside force that has done as much to antagonize Arsenal directly as one of their inside forces. And Mustafi, he continues to be the craziest player I've ever seen in a bad way for Arsenal. In that we've talked about it. He's technically so good. I think when he first came to Arsenal, he had a lot of assists. He showed that he had a lot of attacking nous. When he had the ball. But for all his technical ability, he is one of the dumbest players I've ever seen in my life at any level. At any level, that's including playing co-ed indoor. No offense to the ladies out there, but playing co-ed indoor with people who come onto the team who haven't played the sport before. It's the same level of intuition that I see in Mustafi, game after game after game. And what is he? 3 seasons into his Arsenal career?
Three full seasons now,
and he hasn't learned. He's still making the same dumb mistakes. So I'm sorry. Usually we don't like to make wankers of the week, wankers of the season, somebody Arsenal related. But I mean, how can you not? I don't know who you had for that.
Well, no, that's a good one. He actually featured the most he ever has for Arsenal this season. He appeared and started 31 Premier League matches, 31 out of 38.
Wow.
And for a total of 38 starts and 2 substitution appearances. So he featured 40 times for Arsenal this season.
Yeah.
And that's 2 more than last season and 3 more than his first season, which you remember up until he got injured in his first season, we went 20 games unbeaten. But that, miracles happen all the time, right? So
even for Mustafi, yeah.
No, without going on some tangent around a referee or some other player outside or inside of Arsenal, I think you're right. He's polarizing because we've seen him play very well and provide a much needed spark as a new defender that's come in. I mean, a World Cup winner, for goodness sakes, and several other accolades. It's not like he was completely unknown by any means. A full German international coming into the squad 3 years ago. But even just watching the Burnley match, when they scored their goal, you could see behind him Koscielny doing everything he could to get goal side or to get in front of the offensive player to head the ball out, win the ball. And Mustafi is standing a good 5 feet behind Ashley Barnes. And basically just kind of does this little jump and hoping that basically Barnes misses it. I mean, the marking and the general kind of spatial defensive awareness
Yeah.
is something that you would expect a lot more out of a professional footballer,
Right.
and
No,
you
that's what
don't get it.
I maintain that if he had like anyone else's brain, like he would be good, because his body is capable, but his brain is just like this that taken from a bird or something. Like it's just not capable.
Right. Yeah, and I think don't want to dog him too much, but I think 99.99 repeating of fans out there would agree with us that
Yeah. Needs to
he is
go.
not he is not an Arsenal. He's not the ideal Arsenal defender or the one that's going to take us to the promised land by any
Yeah.
means.
And he's an expensive one too. So I think everyone's of the opinion he needs to move along this summer. All right, so more positively, who would you have as your surprise player of the season? If you don't have one, I would venture one or two.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
unfortunately both of my choices are players that got injured
Mm.
halfway or early on in the season and
Okay, so
did
you have
not
one of
feature.
mine. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think mine, to be honest with you, is Rob Holding. Um,
Yeah.
I thought because of injuries early on in the year, he was asked to come in and play some pretty big games for us. And when, and it, I think he's a perfect example of what I was referring to from a transfer market perspective. He cost what, 2.5 million, something like that, right? Or
Was
maybe
he
even less.
was he a Bolton guy or somewhere else? Maybe I'm thinking somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, very, very cheap. And of course, the famous Arsene Wenger quote, I'm sorry they didn't cost 55 million pounds, but he he seemed to be in the stretch of games. I think he played like 7, 8 games in a row or something like that. And I thought did very well at
Mm.
man of the match type performances in many of them. And very unfortunate to get the injury that he did because both Bellerin and of course Holding suffered the knee injuries to put them out long term or the rest of the season. And I thought he was potentially going to be a solution to some of our our lack of defensive options, I should say.
Yeah.
And for to not have a player like him available to give, I was going to say Mustafi a rest, but allow us to not have to play Mustafi the most times he's played in Arsenal shirt
Yeah.
so far is unfortunate. And I just thought for being as young as he is still and developing and to have come in and done as well as he did when he was playing, I thought was very very impressive. And hopefully he'll come back stronger and we can see more of that in the future.
Okay. So maybe you didn't have one of mine. I was going to say, and maybe this is a cheat, but Aaron Ramsey for me was a surprise player this season because, we know he's capable of good things. I just didn't think he had it in him. And I think what was surprising for me was how good he was after it came out that after his contract thing was
Yeah,
settled and he was going to Juve, he was really good and
yeah,
he was indispensable for Arsenal. I think that's really where things started to go pear shaped for Arsenal was when he got crocked in that Man U game. So for me, he was a surprise in that he still had a lot in the tank, and he was still that integral to Arsenal even after even for someone who was on their way out. He was I'd say my main surprise of the season. Maybe that's just for me personally because I'm usually not an Aaron Ramsey fan. The other one was Bernard Leno. Um, thought I didn't actually expect much from him at the beginning of the season. He had a few shaky things, which you're like, okay, that's what keepers have. They need to get settled with their defense and their club and everything before they get solid. But for me, just given I guess Arsenal's history of bad goalkeepers and not a lot of luck with goalkeepers in the past, I didn't expect much out of him, and I thought he was one of the going to be a bit of a spoiler here for the next question, but one of the players of the season for me was
yeah,
how steady he was for Arsenal, considering how bad his defenders were. Okay. Like, give the guy a break, I'd say, on a couple games where, some flew in what maybe normally you'd say they shouldn't have. There were so many flying at the goal in general in those games that, like, I think he deserves more credit even than he even got. So he was one of my players of the season. I'm spoiling that now. That was the next question, was your 5-man Arsenal team of the season. If you don't have 5, I can understand this season. That's okay. Maybe 4, maybe 3. But I've got at least maybe I don't have 5. I've got at least 4. I don't know if you can do better than me, or if you want me to. I already started you off with Bernard Leno, so
Yeah, I have
um,
I have a I have 5, and I'll do a 6-man. We'll do a basketball
oh,
type, and
right,
I'll explain why that is.
okay,
But yeah, Bern Leno's definitely on there for me. I think arguably the best keeper in the Premier League in 2019. Maybe
yep,
not so much, kind of a little bit of a shaky start, making some very Arsenal-esque moves back there, but yeah, really, really solid, I thought, so far in 2019, and kept us in a lot of games, won a lot of games for us, but also kept us from being embarrassed even more in some of the the later games
yeah,
in the season here. So yeah, he'd be on the team in no particular order, I might add. And I know I dogged both of them a little bit last week when I talked about our offense not coming through in certain scenarios, but both Aubameyang and Lacazette are in there for me. So Leno, Aubameyang, Lacazette, Aaron Ramsey is 4, and then Lucas Torreira would be 5. I know he didn't feature as much as we maybe would have liked the last
yeah,
couple of months, but I thought he was immense for 80% of the season or whatever it was. And then I think my 6th man, honestly, would be someone like Laurent Koscielny, to come back from the injury that he did and play as well as I think that he did over this month's stretch with very little to no help whatsoever. Well, of course, when Socrates wasn't in there, who could be another one?
yeah.
He could take, I think, the place of many of the guys that I named in that top 6 or so, but just because Koscielny is our captain, or has been our captain, and coming back in fairly short order from such a severe injury to play such a role back there that he did, I thought was really impressive. So those would be my 6, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, sorry if I zoned out during some of them, and I'm going just to repeat some of yours. But for me, the player of the season was Lacazette. I think, for me, a player of the season is someone who, despite the opposition, is pretty steady, is pretty consistently good. Don't
Yeah.
have to be great, but in the Premier League, especially for Arsenal, where players are so patchy, someone who is that consistent, I think was really reminiscent of, like, some of the players of olden days for Arsenal. Especially his partnership with Aubameyang, I think was reminiscent of, the good old days where you had those elite players really hooking up for Arsenal, which is not something you can really say about the Arsenal teams for the last season or two. There's a lot of like elite partnerships. But anyway, Lacazette was my number 1. Leno, I already said, was on that list. Also steady. Ramsey, I know he didn't play that much overall, but very steady, very important to the team. And then I had Torreira, who was I think what you would say was more steady near the beginning of the season, and probably like three quarters of the way through the season. Kind of fell off there a little bit at the end. I think that was maybe something had to do with the way he was being deployed. And then last but not least, Aubameyang, who you know, I don't think he had a great season actually, but he just scored so many goals. Like, you can't not have
Yeah,
him double negative
he's
on
a
the
really
best team.
it's really a weird one with him because he ties for the Golden Boot. Our
Yeah.
first
Yep.
30 first time we've had a 30 plus goal scorer in a season since Van Persie, right? So it's been several seasons now, and then to have Lacazette, kind of as a secondary goal scorer, even though he had 16 on the season, I think, something to that effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to say that your Golden Boot tying leading goal scorer, 30 plus goal scorer on the season, you know, didn't really have a great season.
Right. It's not yeah, he had a pretty good season is how I would put it. I wouldn't
Yeah,
say he's like, "Oh, he didn't have a good season." Sounds like he, had a bad season. He didn't have a bad season, but, just wasn't as good as it could have been, and
yeah.
yet he's Golden
Well, and
Boot,
here's a question for you, because I defended him in the fact that people were tweeting after the Burnley match that Oh, if he would have made the penalty against Tottenham,
Yeah.
we would have finished in the top 4, and he would have won the Golden Boot. Well, first and foremost, you don't know
Well,
if it would have played out that way had we won that match.
that's pretty revisionist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and second,
Mm.
maybe we should take more than 1 point from a possible 6 in our last 2 home matches.
Right.
That might be
that might be the key.
that might be key right there, just to maybe win the home matches that we should. Really helps a lot. However, I think, would we be changing our tune about his season had we finished in the top 4 and ahead of Tottenham, or maybe both?
Yeah, I mean, we would have changed our tune about a lot of players, including that, well, yeah, but it's certainly him, and especially the manager. I think that's one. Yeah, it's just so relative, and it's just so circumstantial. Some of these reviews, because on the other hand, if we didn't have the Europa, I'm switching gears to the manager now, but if we didn't have the Europa League final coming up, I mean, there would be hell to pay for Unai Emery
Yeah.
and the way he finished the season. But we've got that carrot at the end of the stick, so everyone's kind of like forgetting that for the time being. But yeah, certainly Aubameyang, I think he would have had more of a positives. He would have been cast in more of a positive light. But and again, I want to be clear. Like, I don't think he had a bad season. I just I only put him in my team of the season because of his goal product or production. Most of the other players in my team of the season for Arsenal were more consistent, I thought, than Aubameyang. So, real quickly before we talk about maybe the Europa League final and some other things that are going to finish this out, your short list, 3-man out the door wish list for Arsenal.
Out the door, huh?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I know you got at least 3. They're probably the same 3. We probably all across Arsenal Christendom here. I'm holding a bobblehead for Dennis Bergkamp. I don't know if it's for good luck or what, but I'll put it down now. All the way across the Arsenal fanhood, I think we all have the same 3 who we wish would leave the club. I don't know if you've
Well, number 1 would
that.
be Oz, or I not a Freudian slip, but slipped up there. So Mustafi would be first and foremost.
Yeah.
Maybe a very close second, possibly number 1. I would say Ozil.
Yeah.
I'm done with him. Third, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people would say Xhaka. I actually, I don't think he's as bad as people think. I just think I still don't think that I don't think Unai Emery knows how to use him appropriately. He is a terrible defender. I'm not defending.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. He's so reliant on the players around him. So don't you dare put him in charge of being the only one back to defend or mind defensive midfield. Yeah, no, don't you dare do that.
There was a stretch during the season where Torreira and Xhaka, we discussed this on the podcast. I distinctly remember it, where
they have to play together.
We were saying, man, Arsenal have finally found the partnership we've been longing for. Torreira, the bulldog in the middle, wins everything. Tracks back, puts in great tackles, and Xhaka can play a bit more forward, play those diagonal balls, just be a bit more proactive about pushing the ball forward after when we win it back. It doesn't have to do quite as much dirty work as we maybe asked of him in the past. And then when Torreira went away late in the season, we saw the shortcomings of Xhaka, of course.
Yeah.
Just tenfold. And it was when the light was shined upon him or shone upon him, he shriveled up, like a scrotum in the cold.
Whoa, there it is.
I
was interested to see where that was going, and it went where I kind of anticipated.
Yeah. Sorry, last podcast of the season, I'll use that term.
Let it out. Right.
Yeah. Anyhow, so third, I'm not going to say Jacques. I'm going to say Monreal.
Ooh, that hurts. Monreal is my favorite, but I see where that's coming from. He had probably his worst season in quite some time.
And he's out of contract, so why would you re-sign him? He's getting older as well.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, well, because he's the only good left-sided, unfortunately, the left-sided defender we have. The other one who bombs up and down doesn't really play defense. But yeah, I know what you mean. He didn't have a great season. Mine was Mkhitaryan. I think
Yeah.
just so useless is too strong.
Overpaid.
Uh, but that's part of it for what he's
Yeah.
paid. For what he's paid, it's like we talked about it a few games back, and actually, I know I was kind of on a rant then, but I feel like that sums up a lot of his season. Like he'll have he'll have like one or two good games, but again, he's one of those. He and Ozil, I call the rink rats. They'll show up and if they have one good pass in 10 games, that's enough for them. It's like the guys who keep playing golf because they shoot one on the fairway every 18 holes. It's the one shot that keeps them coming back and makes them think that they're good.
Right.
And that's how I feel like Mkhitaryan is. He has so little end product and contributes so little on the other end on defense that
He was our third leading goal scorer this year, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mkhitaryan.
Yep.
Well, how many did he have?
7.
Oh, see, that's like
Well,
whatever.
And actually that it kind of shines the light back on the offensive shortcomings because it was so
Lopsided.
It was so lopsided. You had Aubameyang, Lacazette,
Right.
and then Mkhitaryan way down the list. And actually looked up the list of the top 50 goal scorers. There's top 50 and ties in the Premier League, and Arsenal had 3 with Mkhitaryan, I think, tied for 48th or something like that.
Right.
But Liverpool, I think City had 6 of the top 50 goal scorers.
Well, I want to know
5. So
to my point, to help justify my point, I want to know what games Mkhitaryan scored these goals in, because it's like, okay, so you're saying Premiership goals, he scored 7. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
I want to know what games he scored these goals in, because I can never remember a Mkhitaryan goal that was like, oh, thank God he scored. He really saved our skin. It's like he scored like 2 when or a goal or something when we like smashed, like Fulham or something. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. But like something like that, like just so unimpactful for Arsenal and yet so expensive. That's just how the taste that Henrik Mkhitaryan leaves in the mouth for me. Just someone who is so unreliable, and yeah, he is the epitome. And I know this. I don't know who coined this phrase. Maybe it was Arsblog or somebody, but he is the epitome of the Goldilocks era at Arsenal. The Goldilocks being like, the game's got to be just right for him to do well. And when I think of that, I think of Ozil and Mkhitaryan. They're like the top of the list. Mustafi, he's got a different problem. He's just an idiot. That's not his thing. He's always bad. But like in terms of what you expect about or from a player being very, very good or living up to their potential, especially on offense, Mkhitaryan and Ozil, it's just got to be, the stars have to align for them to be to live up to their hype. And well, first of all, Mkhitaryan really didn't have that much hype, so I'm not sure why we paid as much as we did for him. But certainly he's one of the ones for me who has just not been getting it done. The Xhaka point is a good one because he's still, like we said, a player who's kind of a victim of those around him. I think he's a little too one-dimensional, but can be good if he's got the right team set up around him. Yeah, he just hasn't really evolved from the player that he was when he first got here. Really, he's like the exact same player. Shortcomings are exactly the same. Strengths are still there.
Yeah,
those are good.
I would equate Granit Xhaka to like the designated hitter in baseball. So like
yeah,
these professional baseball teams will have so for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, essentially there's an American league and a national league in professional baseball here in the States. Mm-hmm. And the American League does not require the pitchers to hit. So you can have what's called a designated hitter. And these teams pay big money for a guy that all he does was hit. He doesn't field. So it's like, if we can get Granit Xhaka just to hit and not have to play defense,
right,
he would thrive. Like if he was our designated hitter and only had to do 1 or 2 things,
yeah,
he is oftentimes one of our best players at doing those things. However, when he is called upon, as we've mentioned, to do much more than 1 or 2 things, he can't do it.
Right. Unfortunately, something that myopic like the designated hitter or whatever. In soccer,
it doesn't exist.
It could not unpractical, exist. Unreasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So those are maybe we spent a little much too much time on the players out, but those are our short lists for this season. And I think the positive way to look at it, if we could talk directly to Emery and those in charge of recruiting players for Arsenal, is get more players like a Lacazette and obviously a Aubameyang, someone who can score, but people who are specialists and um, they're not marquee players. Now I know Aubameyang might be kind of a marquee player, but I feel like, and this is kind of like an epidemic across the Premiership. There's so many players. I'm thinking of like Pogba at Man U, and in other players, Ozil at Arsenal. Like I feel like clubs just buy them to have a name, and it doesn't matter how much they actually produce consistently. And Arsenal they've got too many of those players already. Maybe they're not marquee players, but they're players who don't produce consistently. I'm thinking of the Lacazettes, the Torreiras, the Lenos, even Socrates, players like that who are more consistent for Arsenal. Arsenal just needs more of them, and they need to. Unfortunately, I don't know how this still has happened. I guess, well, because they inherited a bunch from Arsene Wenger, they still need to cut a lot of the deadwood from this Arsenal squad, and that needs to be done this summer. So, I'm almost as interested to see who they let go this summer as much as who they bring in. But certainly, Arsenal needs to bring players in. We've talked about that to
Yeah, well,
no,
there's certainly
no shortage.
no stranger now, the club, to letting contracts run down.
Mm,
Quite a few have run down with no. I think if they were going to re-sign Monreal, they would have done it by now.
right,
Yeah, obviously Welbeck's gone, Ramsey
right,
gone, Petr Cech's gone.
right.
So that's just four right there. I don't know who else within the
Yeah,
squad is coming up here. I'm sure there's plenty in 2020. But we always heard about Arsenal are in contract talks with a year left with so and so,
right.
and not much contract news whatsoever out of the Arsenal camp this season
Yeah,
for any one particular player. Obviously, the Ozil debate over that contract, rages on. But
yeah.
all that said, yeah, it should be a very interesting summer. Of course, of which Arsenal are headed back to the U.S. So I'm sure many of
Mhm.
you listening or watching this will have a chance to see them. So that should be fun. Hopefully, you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for some of these tickets, which I've heard are quite expensive at some of the venues.
Yeah,
We, however, I don't think we'll be attending, as you're getting married, Joel, and I'll be just not attending.
yeah, yeah.
But
Sadly, I couldn't work that into the honeymoon. There's no destinations on Arsenal's U.S. tour that were honeymoon suitable. So,
yeah,
s-
yeah,
sad.
I mean,
All right.
ultimately, I think the parting words I would have for our audience, and we'll be back with something podcast or otherwise after the Europa League final, but we still have
Mhm.
a couple weeks here. I really appreciate everyone sticking with us through the good and the bad times this season, and continuing to patron um, be good patrons of the podcast and support the show and do all the things that you know I guess the audience do. So have a great summer, everyone, and we'll talk to you
Well, before
on the other.
but
Well, I mean, just from my side, but feel free to
I
share
will
your
add, but
final
before,
thoughts here.
but I'm saying you should have some more last words. How about for your last words, make a prediction for the Europa League final? How about that?
Yes. So I think it will be 2-2 at the end of regulation, and
Ooh,
Arsenal win in extra time 3-2.
okay. So 3-2. I'm gonna write in all those nuances. 3-2 win extra time. All right, I'm gonna have a 2-1 win. I feel like it's gonna be an old school 2-1 win over Chelsea, who I think they'll be up for it initially, but they too will shrivel like a scrotum in the cold
Perfect.
once Arsenal puts in the first goal. That is vital.
Scored,
If they
scored by
don't, then
Mustafi.
headed in by Mustafi. Yeah, won't
Assisted by
that be?
Shaq.
Won't that be the day? Yeah, right. Okay. So those are our predictions to the Europa League final. Yeah, it hasn't really set in for me. I don't know about everyone else out there. It hasn't really set in for me that Arsenal are in that final. It's just first of all, it's a kind of a weird final. They're not. It's not the Champions League. It's not the FA Cup, which is something we're very used to here. but it still is a final, and I think in the next week here, I'll get that cup final fever, that cup final mood that will creep into all of our Arsenal brotherhoods here. But right now it hasn't really set in. But yes, it is something that Arsenal has to look forward to here in the next couple weeks. I think it'll be an evenly fought match. Both teams haven't been doing that well in the end of their form in their in the Premier League. So yeah, it will be a game that I think won't be a walkover for either team. So we'll just we'll let them play the game, and then we'll have more thoughts about in conclusion, Unai Emery's job here in his first season at Arsenal, and what we have to look forward to and what we have to do in the summer. So we'll leave you till the other side of that cup final against Chelsea in the Europa League. Until then, as always, remember, support the Arsenal and have a good 2 weeks.